So, I just realized something that I was troubleshooting a board the other day, and I realized that I had a problem which I thought was in the address lines. It ends up, it was in the address lines. The socket that I was using a socket in another socket between a socket between the actual socket and my Fluke because I didn't want to stretch out the pins of the original socket. And I had bent back one of the pins, so one of the address lines was actually not getting through. And I realized I've never actually showed anyone how to, I think I've done this before, but I've actually never showed you how to actually verify the address lines. So, on an oscilloscope. So I want to do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you on the oscilloscope and overhead with this camera how you check that. So the first thing you do is you find something on the Fluke. Let's say I want to check the address lines on ROM range. Maybe I want to check address lines, A0 through A9. Okay, I want to see if the address lines are actually getting through to the EPROMs. So what we do is we choose an address that will trigger the EPROM that we're gonna probe at, and we want all the address lines to be 0. So in this case, I'm trying to. This is an old head-on board, and I want to test the address lines. What I'm going to do is I'm going to choose address 400 because that's this EPROM here that I've actually taken out of the socket. And normally when you're looking at a board and it's running, the address lines are all over the place, because it's running. Even if it's broken, it's probably flipping out. All right. So we need to isolate, make sure we control the address lines, and then we want to capture on our oscilloscope when it goes down, when that line is selected. Okay, so what I do here is I go to my Fluke and I just read at an address. So we're going to do read at 400 because that's the first address on that ROM, and all the address lines will actually be 0. Address 400 hex in binary is actually 1 followed by 10 zeros, and the 2708 only has 10 address lines. So all of its address lines are zeros. It never sees that top one. That's part of the address decoder circuit that sees that. But it's actually address 0 from addresses 0 through 9. All those addresses are 0. And the opposite would be read 7FF. Their addresses A0 through A9 are going to be all 1s. Okay? All those bits are going to be 1s. But what you want to do is you want to read, and you want to loop. So I did a read at 400 looping. Okay. Now let's go back to our oscilloscope, and we want to actually go ahead and we need to measure the chip select when that goes on, because that's going to be going on and it's going to be looping. And what I do is I set my timing on my oscilloscope so I only see the cycle, that as it goes down until it goes back up. I only want to see one phase, if you will. All right. I don't know if phase is the correct word. I'm old and I don't remember things anymore. So I'm right now, all the address lines should be 0. So we look at that, and now we're going to go ahead and probe each of these address lines. Okay. You can see I'm going to probe each of the address lines here, and you can see that from the overhead probably better. We'll just keep it on there. Starting at address 7, which is the top left corner. All right. And since it's looping, and that's important, you have to put it in loop. You see, okay, when it goes down here, the second channel that I'm probing on is down. And it's important, you want to capture this. This is your trigger. The chip select is your trigger. Okay, so it's going to start recording or drawing when the trigger goes low. And I've set the trigger, if you look at the oscilloscope, I set the trigger when the slope goes down. Okay, so and then you set your trigger point somewhere up here. If I set it up here, it goes weird because it's not actually going down. So when the signal on this chip select pin that I'm probing, channel 1, goes to this, once it hits this trigger line, that is when it goes below that, that's when we record. And we want to look at all the address lines. So right now, all the address lines should be 0. Okay. So let's go look at address. I'm just going to look at address 7 because that's the first one at the top. And you can see it's low. When it goes down, the address line is low. That's correct. So we'll go 6, same thing. 5, 4, 3, 2, oops. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And now we have address 8 and address 9. So all those address lines are getting through correctly. Now let's set that the opposite. Let's read that looping. Okay, now we're reading, and all the address bits should be high because all the address bits for 7FF, A0 through A9 are all going to actually be 1s. And we should see that, excuse me, as we probe them. So we'll probe, okay, I'm going to probe address 7. You can see it's high now. As that goes down, that signal's high. Okay, that's address line. That's a high. Next one, we're now at 5, A5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay? And address 8 and 9. Now, if something was wrong, let's say a line was stuck or it was not getting through, if I was expecting high, I might see lower, or vice versa. So that's the way you can use your oscilloscope to actually validate, and you have to have your Fluke to validate the address lines.
As always, I want to thank my Patreon supporters who allow me to do this. If you're not a Patreon supporter, please consider becoming one. You can give $1 or $3. $3 would be more appreciated because between PayPal or whoever in Patreon, they eat. If you give me $1, they eat like more than 50% of it. Give a couple bucks, I appreciate it, and it helps me justify my very limited time to make these videos. I enjoy making these videos and teaching you guys things, but I do have a lot of going on in life, so it's hard for me to justify sitting down and spending the time to do this. But that helps out, and it shows that people actually are interested. So if you're not a supporter, please become one. If you are, thank you very much for your support.